Welcome to the future of Israel and the Jewish people. Tonight is an exciting show. Why? Because we're going to study the book of Job. Did you ever hear the expression, have the patience of Job? Well, Job did have patience. He kind of lost it with his friends, but he had patience sort of with God. He was waiting on God to deliver him. And you know, he was considered the most righteous person. How do you become righteous? By believing God. And proving that by doing what you believe is God's will. So, he lived probably at a time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He came from the same area as Abraham did, the Chaldeans in Ur. Modern day Iraq today, probably was the most successful man of his times. He was the David Rockefeller of his time. Isn't that amazing? Now, you know, from the time creation, we had sin immediately after Adam and Eve disobeyed God. He gave them one commandment, and they decided to not keep it. You know, it just shows human nature. They always think they can do better for themselves than God's plan. So we had a couple of righteous people after that. We had someone like Enoch, who after he pleased God so much, God took him up to heaven. There's no indication he ever died. Then we had Noah, who spent probably 100 years building an ark to save the animals and his family. Think about that. For 100 years, people are making fun at you, saying, you know, are you crazy? It never rained. We're so far from the ocean. How are you going to use this boat? But one day, when he was told to get in and get out of this world, the storm came and lifted him above the chaos and the confusion. He spent a year in that boat with those animals. Came out, God gave him a rainbow, and you know, that's all you need sometimes is a promise from God saying, this is the way it's going to be. So, what are we going to talk about with Job tonight? Well, let me just start off with a little bit of a narrative to bring you in. We know that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve wound up sinning, and sin entered the world. Then murder, then all kinds of idolatry, all kind of pride and arrogance. We've talked about Noah here. But if this happened after the flood, and if it happened at the time when God was getting ready to choose a man like Abraham, he also had another righteous man around called Job. So I'm going to read just a little bit of a narrative paragraph for you. It said, Job don't seem to be a member of God's chosen line. Why? Well, we know the line comes through Abraham. So, whose offspring he was, there's no record of that, and there's no record of who wrote this book. At the beginning, it was carried on by oral conversation, one generation telling the next generation. And probably maybe Moses recorded it when he wrote the other 5 books, but we don't know. And we're not going to speculate either. But he is portrayed as a man who knew the true God and worshiped him. Well, as we get into this, and it's about 40 chapters long, so it's going to be a long series. We probably won't read all of the text. It would take too long. It would take the rest of the year to do that. But we'll recapture the important parts. He worshiped the true God. He probably lived around the same time as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because of the way his life is described. But certainly it isn't positive. Now, when you open your Hebrew scriptures, which we hope you have in front of you, you won't find it as the second book. And you won't have the opinion that it happened in the series I'm telling you, but believe me, it did. It's one of the oldest books of the Bible. And the other thing is that if you go to a New Testament, if you're a Gentile, you'll probably find it around Psalms and Proverbs. You won't find it after Genesis. But take my word for it. This happened early on in humanity. The current era is 2,000 years old. Abraham was probably 2000 BC. So this happened somewhere between creation and Abraham, maybe about 4,000 years ago. All right, enough of history. Job is tested, it says. And Job is portrayed as a wealthy man, upright character who loved God. You know, not everybody who has money is evil. Who loved God? He did. Yet God allowed Satan to destroy his flocks, his possessions, his children, his health. Job refused to give up on God, even though he does not understand why this is happening to him, just like the rest of us. We too must trust God when we don't understand why we face difficulties. Well, here we go. As we read this, you'll see that it isn't God doing it to him. It's the enemy of God that's doing it to him. And I'll explain how he's able to do that. Now, a lot of people claim that the devil can't make you do anything. Well, he does tempt you. But he also has influence over certain things that can raise havoc in our lives. So here we go. The prologue. This is chapter 1, starting with verse 1 of the book of Job. J-O-B, if you're looking for it in your index. There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Ur. He was blameless, a man completely integrity. He feared God and stayed away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in the entire area. So, it says he was a righteous man, and he was rich. If you're righteous and you're rich, you didn't get it by osmosis, and you didn't get it by being a crook. Okay? Job's sons would take turn preparing feast in their home. And they would also invite their 3 sisters to celebrate with them. When their celebration ended, sometimes after 7 days, Job would purify his children. He would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt offering for each of them. For Job said to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and have cursed God in their heart." This was Job's regular practice. Well, most celebrations have alcohol. Alcohol dullens your conscience. It causes you to have a loose behavior. And so maybe they drank too much, maybe they cursed, maybe they did fornication, I don't know. But Job was interceding with God for his children. That is a responsibility every parent has. Well, we're at chapter 1, verse 6, Job's first test. Now, this is a very important part. Pay close attention to what I'm saying here now. One day, the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before God, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. Where have you come from, the Lord asked Satan. Now you got to remember that even before man was created, a third of the angels rebelled against God. That was the first rebellion. Adam and Eve was the second. Okay? And when they did, they were casted down from heaven. Now, they still patrol the earth. They still try to influence mankind who replaced them. So the Lord says to Satan, where were you? Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord answered Satan, asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man completely in integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. Well, there's the answer to how to be righteous. Satan replied to the Lord, yes, but Job has a good reason for fearing God. He has always put a wall around and protected him and his house and his possessions. You have made him prosperous in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Well, God knew without a doubt what Job's behavior was going to be. So he's not doing it to prove to himself that Job is righteous. But Job might need to know he's righteous in spite of what he goes through. Okay? All right, you may test him, the Lord said to Satan. Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but do not harm him physically. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now, why would a good, loving, kind God allow this? You know, some people say all things work for the good for those who call according to his purpose. Well, you will see that to be true. But you got to realize that when Adam and Eve had dominion over the earth and they disobeyed God, Satan robbed that from them. So they no longer had the dominion that they needed. And Satan did. Number two, we see this with Jacob in Genesis that we just finished. When Jacob persuaded his brother to give him his birthright, Esau could not get it back. Though he prospered, he never got the birthright back. He never got to be the tribe that was going to represent God as the chosen people and to which line the Messiah would come from. We know the Messiah comes from the tribe of Judah. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the older brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's house with the news. Your oxen were plowing, with the donkeys feeding beside them, and the sandbags raided us. They stole all the animals and killed all the farmhands. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Now, if that's not enough, listen to the rest of this. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Well, that wasn't enough, okay? While he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chindads arrived and have stolen your camels and killed your servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in the older brother's house. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you this. Well, you'd almost wish that the messengers didn't escape. You know, sometimes they say ignorance is bliss, but the truth is very important, and it will eventually set you free. So, what does Job do? I mean, you see, when God's protection's around you, you are protected. And when the enemy is around you, you're vulnerable. We don't blame things on God necessarily. And that's what people like to do. What they can't explain, they assume this is what happens. And this whole book is about assumptions. So, Job stood up, tore his robes in grief, and then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord giveth me what I have, and the Lord taketh it away. Praise the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or blame God. Well, see what a righteous person does? He doesn't blame God. That's important. Ripping his robes was a sign of mourning, like ripping your heart out. And ashes was a sign of fasting, mourning. You know, we know that when someone dies, there's a time for mourning. So Job has lost everything except his health and his wife. Now, chapter 2 starts off very interesting, okay? Job's second test. Well, he lost 4 major things, and now he's going to be tested again. See, God never tempts you, but he will allow you to be tempted, okay? But he will find a way of escape. But you will be tested. You will be stretched to prove what your right attitude and your faith is. So here's what happened. One day, the members of the heavenly court, now these are angels that are coming, okay? Coming again in the presence themselves before the Lord. And the accuser, Satan, came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that has gone on. Then the Lord answered Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is a fine man in all the earth, and he is blameless, a man completely integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil, and he has maintained his integrity, even though you urge me to harm him without cause. Well, same discussion. Nothing's changed. Okay? Here comes Satan again with his reply. Satan replied to the Lord, skin for skin. A man will give everything he has to save his life, but reach out and take away his health, and he will surely curse you to your face. Well, you see, that's what he's looking for us to do in our trouble, is to curse God. All right, do with him as you please, the Lord said to Satan, but spare his life. See, God puts limits on what can be done to us. So Satan left the Lord's presence, and he struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot. Well, I don't know what this was. If you've had poison ivy, you can identify maybe. If you've had shingles, you could probably really identify. But whatever he did, it really was brutal. Job scratched his skin with a piece of broken pottery, and he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." We don't need advice like this when we're sick. But Job replied, "You talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" So in all this, Job said nothing wrong. Boy, it's good to keep our mouth shut sometimes, you know. Now, Job had some friends, and like good friends, they come and visit the sick. Sometimes they come to visit the family of those that have lost ones. Many times the best thing we can do is remain silent. But that's not what happens in this case. And this is why Job needs a lot of patience. Okay? Chapter 2, 11 through 13. When 3 of Job's friends heard of the terrible he had suffered, they got together and traveled from their home to comfort and console him. Well, okay. When they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and threw dust in the air over their heads to show their grief. All right? Emotions are emotions. Most people can't control them. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. Is that where shiver comes from? 7 days and 7 nights? No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. Well, I'm going to read you a little bit about Job's friends from the narrative here, and not necessarily from the Bible text. It says here that Job's situation with his 3 friends explains that he must be suffering because so many terrible sins he committed. They tried to persuade Job to repent of his sins. When Job argues that he has not sinned enough to deserve such suffering, his friends respond with even harsher accusations. Well, there are elements of truth in their speech of Job's 3 friends. They are based on the wrong assumption. I mentioned that earlier. We must be careful what we assume to be true in the lives of others. Unfortunately, we all do this all the time, myself included. We cannot assume that the suffering is their own fault as a result of sin. Well, let me tell you, all have sinned and fell short of the glory of God. But God created us in His image. He loves us. Everything that we have that's good comes from Him. We have to look at this book and see that a lot of our trouble comes from somewhere else. And before we go any further, I want to talk about where suffering has its origin sometimes. When trouble happens, it doesn't always come from Satan, as in Job's story. It doesn't always come from things that we can explain. And we have a situation here that sometimes it is our own fault. I mean, if we smoke cigarettes and we come down with lung cancer, well, it affects us and others, but, you know, we should confess it, repent, turn from it. Sometimes other people sin against us, and we suffer along with other people in our family. People rob from us, okay? Many people could be involved. The action of resisting sinful behavior is what we have to look at. We got to be careful who we make friends with, okay? We need to avoid certain things. You know, if we're warned about a storm coming, we need to take precautions. A lot of people are going to be exposed to this trouble. So, if we don't take the preparation, we could drown in a hurricane. We could lose our lives in an earthquake when a building falls on us because we didn't go to the basement, or in a tornado. And then there's the things that we don't know at all. And maybe they do come as a natural phenomenon or from Satan. But more people will be affected by that. And the outcome is we don't know what it is. So we need to trust God and be faithful and pray. So we're going to continue with this book in a next show. And I think you'll find it interesting how we go from here. Remember, if you want to see any of our previous shows or you miss a show in a series, go to our website, which is thefutureofisrael.org. If we want to hear from you, let us know what you agree, disagree, or have a question about. You can go to info@thefutureofisrael.org. And if you want to sponsor us in your area, then by all means, email us. It's free. In the meantime, watch us on our website. So, we'll start next show off telling you a little bit more about Job before we get into his friends. And I hope you will be back with us. Briefly, we're going to continue on and on with Job. We're going to show you that it is a spiritual battle that you're in. So have a good night. Bless you wherever you are. Be at peace regardless of what's going on. God is in your situation. Thank you, and shalom.